As many of you may know, I've got a soft spot for horror game Infernium. I bought it on a whim and really enjoyed the look, world, and how it portrayed its lore. The solo developer Carlos Coronado is making more first-person horror games in a series known as Horror Tales. The first is here and in a much better lit atmosphere than fans of the genre may expect. Here is my review of Horror Tales: The Wine for the Nintendo Switch. In The Wine, a small Mediterranean island is under a pandemic from a disease known as the Devil Fever. You play as a father whose family is suffering from the disease. In an attempt to cure your family, you plan to sneak into and steal a bottle of special red wine that is said to be the cure for this illness. But in horror fashion, you encounter a lot of strange occurrences and stalkers along the way. The story of the wine is fairly interesting. Like Infernium, it is not explained through cutscenes, but a bunch of notes that are written and posted in the game's environments. The lore is interesting for those wanting to know the origin of the disease, though it doesn't get really interesting until the final couple of chapters and the really big pieces of lore are dropped. The one thing to keep in mind is without cutscenes, you have to be on the lookout for these notes and papers. If you miss even one or two of them, you could miss a crucial piece of information, especially towards the end. When it comes to gameplay, The Wine is a first-person puzzle horror game. As you go through each chapter, you navigate 3D areas, having to solve puzzles to get from one room to the next, as well as avoiding enemies that will chase you down the moment they know you're there. The thing I find most unique about the games that Carlos makes is the emphasis on puzzles. Every room you go into will have you problem solving on how to get out of it. Some rooms have crates you move to reveal holes in the floor you can use to drop down to the area below. Others will have rubble placed in a certain way for you to platform up and get out. And then you've got more traditional puzzle rooms with locked doors or switches where you need to explore around to find notes or keys to solve those puzzles and move forward. There is a huge emphasis on puzzle solving above all else. As you're doing all this, you have to watch out for enemies as well. What will begin as jump scares to spook you will turn into chase sequences that will call back to Infernium. Some puzzle rooms have an enemy that chases you around where you have to quickly find a way out or run that enemy around the environment several times as you look around and try to solve the puzzle. This is similar to, but a bit more involved than Infernium's system of leading enemies around walls to create distance and get away from them. For starters, the puzzles are not a simple sprint to a lever and jump over a gap to get away. Many of them have you opening up cabinets and drawers for keys or searching through walls for puzzle clues written somewhere. It has a bit of strategy with you learning the room and finding the best path to give you more time and distance to solve the puzzle before that enemy catches up with you. It also makes it a bit easier than Infernium with fewer perfect timing puzzles, and the enemies in The Wine don't one-hit KO the player. You can take a couple hits and still be able to run away and let your health regenerate to keep going. Though considering there really are only two different types of puzzles, you might think this will start to get repetitive. Thankfully, the game changes things up as you go forward so that doesn't happen. We have puzzles to solve, but also warping reality and fake-out puzzles. The latter being mini rooms that have what looks like a puzzle just like the others, but you actually have a different path you're supposed to take. One such room has a 3-symbol puzzle next to a locked door. You just don't realize the puzzle doesn't actually do anything, and you're supposed to explore around to find a key and go through the door. The basics of the game do sound pretty easy, but there is a learning curve. Unlike Infernium, you start the game and are mostly thrown to the wolves. You get little tutorials on basic functions, but how puzzles and everything outside of the basic control scheme work are mostly a matter of going to glowing objects, interacting with them, and seeing what happens. It'll take you a bit of time to learn how things work and what to look for, like I did. Having the ability to pick up and place so many crates and barrels around the opening area led to me spending a good bit of my initial time placing and climbing them, trying to get into various places, only to realize the actual path was far simpler. Now let's get into the scare factor. The Wine is a game that relies on jump scares to creep you out. At the start, this is done pretty well with the enemy encounters. The first couple of times they appear in front of you and give chase, they're pretty good and tense, though the scare factor did drop for me a bit during the second half. Likely from those enemies not just randomly showing up out of the blue and chasing after you, but more being placed as part of the puzzles in the rooms. But outside of the enemies, the game does give you surprises with its way of morphing reality around you. When you move through certain areas, different environments will change when you're not looking at them, giving you a bit of a shock when you go through a door in the middle of a building, turn around and reopen said door to be greeted with an ocean where there was once a room. Now let's get into content and length. The wine isn't quite as meaty and open as Infernium was, so expect it to be a bit less on hours spent, but still enough for the price. The wine costs $14.99 and I managed to get through the story after playing for around 6 hours. That is plenty of time, but you also have photo mode that you can use to access hidden rooms and find collectibles in subsequent playthroughs. Now let's get to presentation, which is quite interesting. The wine looks very good on the Switch, and interestingly enough, the initial version of this game during development was the Switch version. The developer discussed some details with me on how the Switch version was made and upscaled for the other platforms. As such, we have much prettier presentation than Infernium, with a lot of the renders and environments just being all around higher quality and better detailed. Now we do have a soft blur on everything, and some of the detail on the renders do take a bit of extra time to load, but even when you swap it over to handheld mode, it looks pretty good. Now to go into audio for just a moment, the wine doesn't have a lot of audio or sound to it, but Infernium players will notice that the music and sound that plays when enemies are chasing you is the same sound that was used in the chase sequences from Infernium. Not that this is bad, but something I picked up on pretty early. Moving on to performance, things are good here as well. It isn't perfect, as the frames do dip down into the high 20s every so often, but really those dips are going to be between 28 and 30 FPS anyways, so it's not going to cause a big problem. For most of the adventure, you will be getting a nice and smooth 30 FPS in docked and handheld. With that out of the way, let us dive into battery life. The original model gives the wine a battery range of 3 to 4 hours and the Switch Lite a range of 3.5 to almost 5 hours. And on the Redboxer V2 2019 model, we have a range of 5 hours to over 7. In conclusion, the wine brings Infernium's creator back to the Switch with more first-person horror puzzle action. Now on the downside, there are a few small blemishes in presentation, and it does take a bit to grasp during its initial chapter. All in all though, it may not be as open or fantastical as Infernium, but it is still a pretty nice little horror game that is far better optimized than you may expect for being developed by one person. Reviews to go rates The Wine for the Nintendo Switch an 8 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching and have a great day.